Good afternoon, sixth grade students. We are continuing our read of Granted, which is an exciting book. We left our fairy in the clouds and thinking that she had escaped a plane, only to realize she had not escaped a plane. And that's where we begin. Chapter 14, page 88. Enormous flying white tube of death. If she'd been able to form actual words, those might have been the ones. As she glanced back at the jet, easily 10 times the size of the plane that just passed by. Coming in fast on her booted heels, it filled her vision, pointed nose, one long narrow black eye stretched across its face, hulking body, a mechanical beast hundreds of feet long, aiming to crash into her, turn her into nothing more than a splotch on its chin. Its engines, roaring engines, deafened her. She could feel the currents of air getting sucked into them, threatening to pull her backward and chop her to bits. For a second, she thought she could outrun it, and she dug her chin into her chest and clenched every muscle, willing her wings to beat even faster, but it was no use. The jet was gaining. She looked again, and she could almost see the faces of the pilots behind the glass. She was 3 seconds away from becoming fairy goo. Ophelia lowered her head and kicked out with her wings, folding her wings in tight as she dove, hoping to shoot down far enough, fast enough that the plane would miss her. She could hear it above, its grumble becoming a bone-rattling roar. She felt the sheer force of it passing overhead, blocking out the sun, casting her in its immense shadow. Then her ears popped, and she was sent spinning out of control, caught in the jet wash, the many cyclones of air left in the huge plane's wake. Trapped in a vortex, twisting and tumbling head over feet, no sense of up or down, she gasped for air, fought to stay conscious. She spread her wings again and tried to stabilize, but the force of the current overpowered her. Everything swirled. One of the straps securing her satchel to her waist broke, and the bag came free, whipping around as Ophelia somersaulted through the sky. She saw the top flap open and watched helplessly as Charlie's old M&M tumbled free. The med kit, the whistle, and her spare socks followed suit, scattered in the wind, lost forever. Then, to her horror, the baby green acorn with the little wooden button began to jiggle from its pocket. "Oh, no, you don't!" Ophelia contorted, gaining some measure of control, and snatched her satchel to her chest, one hand cupped over the locator, protecting it. Then she strained against the force of the wind to straighten herself out. She was no longer caught up in the wake of the jet, but she was falling way too fast. She could feel the pressure in her head. Black spots started to cloud her vision. Get control of yourself. Fidgets, pull up. Fly, you stupid fairy, fly. Ophelia arched her back and straightened her wings, making them as rigid as possible, trying to find the right angle to slow her descent without snapping them in two. Fairy wings were strong as anything on earth, practically, but they were still paper thin to keep them pliable. Moreover, they were attached to her, and she could feel the muscles in her back straining at the effort. Suddenly the wind shifted, another current swooping up from underneath her, and she caught it, coming out of her spin and arcing upward, gritting her teeth and fluttering like mad to even out. At last, she came to a hovering stop in midair. 3 choking breaths, her heart fluttering faster than her wings. Ophelia tried to recover her wits. She wasn't a splotch. Everything was all right. True, she had absolutely no idea what direction she was facing, but at least it was no longer straight down. She glided for a moment, letting the wind cradle her as she secured her bag, now a great deal lighter at least, and felt her pockets to make sure she'd lost nothing else. The 2 canisters of weaponized fairy dust remained clipped to her belt, as did her knife. She had most of her supplies still, though nothing in the way of food. She pressed her hand to her chest, not to feel her heart, which raced like a hummingbird's, but to make sure the vial was still there, that it hadn't somehow snapped off while she was performing her unplanned aerial aerobatics. It's okay. Calm down, Fidgets. You still have everything you need to grant your wish. It was a minor setback. She was bound to have one. And now, at least, she had a story she could tell Charlie when she returned. The important thing was that the mission was still a go. If she only knew which way she should go, she was completely turned around. Althea spotted the jet that had almost quashed her high above her now, about to disappear into the clouds. It had been headed the same direction as her before. She just hoped it still was. Chapter 15, page 92. Most wishes can come true, if you're lucky, but there are limits to everything. Some wishes are flat out impossible, well beyond the limits of a fairy's meddling. Life and death, for example, are stronger forces than all the fairy magic combined. Once nature had reclaimed a spirit, no granter, scout, or scavenger could track it down, and no amount of dust could bring it back. And even if it could, fairies don't believe in making zombies. Some wishes were not impossible as much as unsustainable. The Fae folk had learned this from experience. World peace, of course, but also ending hunger, eliminating poverty, and ridding the world of injustice. Noble sentiments and worth fighting for, but ultimately outside the limits of what fairies could accomplish. Some problems required much more than a pinch of dust and a shooting star to solve. Sometimes, not often, the wish takes care of itself, like the 4-year-old birthday boy who blew out his candles too soon, wishing everybody would shut up and stop singing so he could eat his cake. The wish was granted before the fairies even knew it was made. Sometimes a wish will backfire and lead to unintended consequences, like the boy who wanted to be invisible, only to be struck by a car. Or the woman who wished that she could eat as much chocolate as she wanted without gaining any weight, but still developed diabetes. Then there are wishes that get tedious after a while, like a song overplayed on the radio. Wishes to be famous, to be popular, all the wishes for money, be it gold coins or paper stacks. Technically grantable, and fairies of the haven have been known to fiddle with the Powerball from time to time, but tiresome and frankly overrated. Keep your wishes simple. That's what most fairies will tell you. Keep them simple and earnest, and don't ever count on them coming true, because the great tree doesn't discriminate, and the odds are most definitely not in your favor. Chapter 16, page 94. Althea wanted a map. She was pondering wishes and which one she would make if she saw a horse or a rainbow. Impossible, of course, as fairies weren't allowed to make wishes, but that didn't stop her from thinking about it. Once she got past an initial craving for a giant peanut butter milkshake with 7 cherries on top, she settled on having a map and maybe a compass, anything to help her pin down her location. She knew that when she got close enough, the magic would begin calling to her. She'd be able to hear the wish whispered in the girl's own sing-song voice. Then she would see the coins sparkling, not only a dot at first, but growing brighter the closer she came. But so far, no voices, no sparkles, no nothing. She obviously wasn't that close. Or maybe she'd gotten off course. The jet, that roaring monster that had tried to murder her, quickly vanished into the horizon. never to be seen again. But Aphia flew after it for another full talk at least. Judging by the sun and the time of day, she was positive she was headed northish. If it were nighttime, she could easily use the stars to help her navigate. Any fairy worth her wings could, but it was only midday still. She should be getting close, she thought, the muscles in her shoulders aching. She should be almost there. She was also getting hungry, her exertions taking their toll. Too bad her chocolatey provisions had tumbled out of her bag in the jet stream. Aphia hovered for a moment, looking around at the long stretches of flat land beneath her, trying to get her bearings. She couldn't keep flying blindly. An emergency pit stop was in order. Find some water, maybe wrangle up some berries if there were any to be had, and then stop and ask for directions. After all, Aphia was one of nature's children. Surely something down there would help her. She broke through a thin carpet of clouds and took in the painted green landscape. Glorious blossoming trees and rolling grass meadows. It wasn't the majestic fir-studded and snow-dusted mountains of home, but it still gave her comfort. She could trace the squiggly paths of a few dirt roads lined with human habitats of various shapes and shades, though nothing suggesting a city close by. She caught sight of a patch of blue beneath her, a pond or a lake rimmed with white colors, with white dots. Birds, geese, or maybe heron. Aphia was too far to tell for certain, but she hoped they were heron. She'd never personally met either species, but everything she'd read had said that geese were not to be trifled with. Relatively smart but ornery, Charlie had told her a goose had tried to chew his arm off once, though it would have taken some time, seeing as how they had no teeth. Regardless, Aphia didn't think she could put up with anyone's attitude right now, at least not until she'd given her wings a rest and had something to drink. She touched down gently at the edge of the pond on the empty side and let herself collapse, her wings folding back, sighing in relief. She didn't let herself rest for more than a tick, however, before sitting upright and inspecting everything again. Pockets padded, bag checked, dust accounted for. Then she tore off her goggles and went over the water to get a good look at herself. Careful not to get too close. Like most fairies, Aphia was a terrible swimmer. It was a superfluous skill for one with wings, which is why she kept her feet firmly planted on the bank, taking in her reflection in the glassy surface of the water. The camo worked only on humans whose brains and imaginations it was specifically designed for, so Aphia could see the ragged state that she was in. Her hair was a knotted blue bird's nest, not necessarily a bluebird's nest, but maybe, tangled and wind-whipped. Dark red rings circled her eyes from where her goggles pressed too tight. Her cheeks were pink and raw, and she had a split in her bottom lip. She must have bitten it while she was trying to regain control during the flight. So much for this being the easy part. Squint had warned her. The world moves fast. Charlie had warned her too. But it was all right, nothing she couldn't handle. Aphia splashed her face and drank down 4 handfuls, relishing in the coolness, winding down her wind-parched throat. Somewhat recovered, she took a moment to assess her surroundings, namely the geese on the other side of the pond. We're going to stop there on page 97, and we will continue tomorrow. Thanks so much, and have a really good evening, and take care.